Yeah.
Well,
right.
Do you want to get started, Martin?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right.
I'm Martin White. Owner of Ruffian Software. We're here to talk about insurance, privileged accounts, all kinds of the security things that MSP face modern day. And I have with me Wes Spencer, who can introduce himself.
Hey, Martin, thanks for having me. I'm Wes Spencer, and currently VP and Channel Chief at 𝘁𝗵𝗁 Solutions. We're a cyber insurance broker, biggest one that's out there, lining up and helping MSPs in that journey. But I'm a cybersecurity guy. I was one of the co-founders at 𝘂𝗁𝗁, and love MSPs. Been the channel for many years now, and absolutely love it. So thanks for having me on your first live stream. This is super cool.
Thanks. I've done quite a few of them, but this is like the first one I've hosted on.
Yeah.
I might do something wrong. I might click a wrong button. We'll see how it goes.
That's the fun of live streams, because it feels like you get to be more relaxed, instead of an overly formal Zoom webinar or whatever. So
yes. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we're here to talk about MSPs and the security journey that they're going on, the things they're facing today, tie in some insurance stuff to that. And then, of course, since our company provides a privileged account management product, we're going to talk about that too. Where do you want to start talking about, Wes?
Boy, I don't know. Why don't we start with, I think this account management stuff is really important. And before we started the live stream, Martin, you were even sharing about, and maybe let's get it kicked off with this. What's the difference between privileged account management and privileged access management? Let's start with that just to make sure we got our ground bases covered here.
All right. Privileged access management. They both have the same acronym, PAM. For privileged access management is making sure that access to a machine that's privileged is protected. This is things like setting rights on accounts, determining which accounts have access to which machines or which networks, things like that. Privileged access management, sharing passwords, making sure only the right person can see that kind of information. That's privileged access management. Privileged account management is a different thing. Privileged account management is managing the accounts that privileged people use when they log in somewhere. So privileged access management is when you have an account, that's where it has access. That is its privileged access management. Privileged account management is everything that privileged access management is, plus it's also managing that account or those accounts for different people across different places.
Okay.
The most
and do you feel like, Martin, do you feel like it's almost like a yin and yang, like they go together?
They definitely do go together.
One more important than the other?
No, they're both very important. Privileged access management is a subset of what privileged account management is, in my opinion. So like privileged access management is this much, and in the Venn diagram, everything privileged access management is encompassed by privileged account management.
Okay, that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit about how important this is, because I'm seeing this on the insurance side grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's getting to a point where it's even going to be a pass-fail criteria. So like, if you guys don't know, if you're watching the live stream today, the way this insurance questionnaires work, if you're an MSP, you've seen them, I know you have, they're long, a whole bunch of questions. And what's kind of wild about it is there's about 5 or 6 questions that are on there that are actually pass-fail. The rest are data gathering. And a lot of people don't know that. So you don't have to answer yes to every single question. The challenge is that they never tell you which ones are criteria to get to whether you're going to get or not get your cyber policy. And Martin, one of the ones that's becoming a criteria is all the questions around PAM, around privileged account and access management, because what the insurance side of the house is seeing, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Martin, what the insurance side of the house is seeing is this is something that if it's not in place, big time damages can happen. Because once an attacker establishes a foothold, and especially if they can get lateral access into the foothold of an account manager that's got admin privileges, and they're able to do that through shared passwords or whatever, they have keys to the kingdom. And really, that's where you get mass ransomware, right? You guys see that, Martin?
Yeah, I talk to security professionals all the time about what they see and what the issues are. The shared administrator accounts or shared passwords for a single administrator account are one of the biggest things that they see. And they see that because lots of MSPs, well, here's a particular story. I have a friend who's a pen tester, does like large scale security things. He was doing a intrusion test for a hospital. And he went to the hospital and they said, he needs access to these things. He needs to see some account information. So they sent him to the MSP for the hospital. And the MSP gave him this Excel spreadsheet of usernames and passwords. The main administrative account was administrator, whatever the hospital name was. And the password was the name of the MSP .rocks ! He immediately knew from his history, and like I knew too when he told me this, that password was shared between all of their clients. So because he had access to one of their clients, he could now go to any of their clients and gain access. So that is that shared password between clients is a big problem. And that one account, when an MSP technician logs in with a shared administrator account and they access something, the logs don't say who did it. And if they go back and look at the logs, or if they're having any sort of SOC or SIM issue, compliancy thing, and some team is looking at those log files and they see the administrator account log in, they really don't have the traceability to know whether it was an actual technician based on the access patterns, or whether it was some hacker coming in from a VPN that just happened to be in the same city. You know, it's
that. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge deal. And you're making me go way back to my information security courses in college. There's this term that we never use anymore. It's called non-repudiation. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Martin, is this ability to say, do I have the ability through forensic log data to be able to say for sure this did or did not happen? Can I repudiate this or can I not? And you're right, that's a big deal. And the challenge that happens, especially in this era of data disclosure laws that every state has, that now the United States has and other countries have, is all around notifying clients if they've been exposed in a data breach. And the thing that compounds this so much when it happens through shared accounts, like you mentioned, is this challenge of, if I can't prove if this admin account does all these things normally and a bad guy leveraged that, and I can't prove that the bad guy did or didn't do it, guess what? I now have to treat all of those accounts as breached, which now the costs go skyrocketing up for you, because you now have to do data credit monitoring, notification, all this kind of stuff. And I'm telling you, Martin, I've seen this happen on the insurance side of the house, and this is where the real damages happen. And so, many people might be listening to this today and they're like, okay, well, cool. That's not my problem. Insurance is going to pay for it. Well, guess what? Insurance is now at this point where they're like, not anymore. And if you look, I am curious if you've seen this in questionnaires, Martin, because we're seeing it like crazy at Fifth Wall, is they're asking questions like, does every single administrator account have unique passwords and multi-factor rolled out for both? And if you say no to that, you don't get insurance. And this is the way it's happening. Are you starting to see that too?
Yeah, we are. We're talking to people are end up talking to us because they come to those insurance questionnaires and they have so many people, so many clients that they have to manage, and so many technicians. And then they see this question on the questionnaire: does every administrative account map to a single person and have MFA on it? And then they start looking at, well, we can answer the MFA thing. They'll try and check that box by saying they have MFA on all those accounts, but then they'll use a shared MFA of some kind, whether it's an OTP that's stored in a password vault so that everybody has access to it or something like that. But yeah, there are lots of MSPs are trying to kind of skirt the issue by technically doing what they think is complying, because they put MFA on an account that 17 people use. They think it's okay.
And this is what makes MSPs such a juicy target for a threat actor, Martin, because like I talked to I have a friend that works in finance and for a really big financial firm. And I was talking about this. He's like, why is this a problem? He's like, this doesn't make any sense at all. You just roll out privileged account management and off you go. And I'm like, but it's much more difficult for an MSP because they're juggling 60 clients, maybe 80, maybe hundreds. And he goes, oh, he's like, I didn't even think about that. I'm like, yeah, the nature of an MSP is they have keys to the kingdom for every client they work with, and he's like, I had never thought about that before. He's like, no wonder MSPs are such a target. And I think that's why this is one of those huge things that like we've got to get as an MSP, we got to get out of the practice of these shared accounts. I know why we use them for ease of use, but that's why the bad guy uses them too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that ease of use and the hiding behind a single account. Say you have 15 technicians who work at your MSP. You have one shared administrator account that they all use, you have no traceability. And as you get more technicians, more clients, 60 clients and 15 technicians, a little bit of math there, that's a lot of accounts. You make a unique account for everybody. We even had, this is one of my favorite stories. We did a demo for a client a while ago. They had over 900 clients that they serviced. They had 70 technicians. So they were in little pods. So 10 technicians here service these 150 clients, and 10 technicians here service 150. So like 70 technicians over 900 clients. The way they did privileged account management is that they had an Excel spreadsheet, which had all 900 clients listed in it with all the passwords for like the administrator account that they used, all the service accounts that they used, was listed in this Excel spreadsheet. This Excel spreadsheet had an ODBC connector that connected it to an internal facing web page that had no protection on it. Anybody on their network could open this Excel spreadsheet through this web page and see all of these accounts and all these passwords.
Oh,
that
boy.
was their method for doing it. It's the only thing they could figure out how to do at that kind of scale.
Oh boy. And I want to ask you this. Do you think, now insurance is not asking this question yet. I think the day will come, but we're not here yet, of like what I call just-in-time check-ins for passwords. Like, do you think it's valuable for me as, let's say I'm an MSP, for me to say, hey, I need access to this client on this XYZ platform. Do you think it's valid and valuable to have like, okay, here's your provisioned access for right now for the next X amount of time, and then I'm going to deprovision that after? Is that valuable, do you think?
That is called, lots of times that's called an ethereal account, or an account that doesn't exist when they need it exists, and then it goes away. For probably 99, 95% of MSP cases, use cases for privileged accounts, that is a very valid way to do it. But there are these edge cases. There's probably 1 to 5% of cases where the client's offline. They don't have internet access, and an MSP technician has to go on site to get logged into the machine to fix whatever the internet access issue is. And in those particular cases, having an ethereal account where the machine has to contact the internet to get provisioned to come back in, makes that type of account sometimes an Achilles heel, but overall it's a good way to do it. I know that a lot of the very large enterprise privileged account management packages do that kind of thing, where they will do last minute elevation or last minute account creation on a server that someone needs access to. But all that's highly dependent on internet connectivity.
That's a good point. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think you illustrate very wisely, controls are effective in certain ways and ineffective in other ways. And it's our job as security practitioners to sort of navigate those waters and understand what controls belong when and where and how. That's a really good point. See a question that came in from Matt Horning. And Matt, hey, I'm glad you joined us today. And I'm going to throw this one to you because you're far more qualified to answer this than I am. What's your thoughts of using IT Glue or another similar platform for password tracking for clients? What do you think about that?
So I have controversial views there, because the password vault or password tracking thing is a great tool. Like, as an individual, I use password vault. I think they're great. Our product has password vault in it, but I think that IT Glue is often misapplied in that people will put the username and password for a shared administrator account, and they'll put the OTP token for the MFA for that account, all in IT Glue, that every technician has access to. So when a technician goes to log into a system, they go to IT Glue, they pull out this information, they put in the OTP token, so they check that checkbox that says they're using MFA. But that just becomes 3 pieces of data to exfiltrate: the username, the password, and the OTP from IT Glue, instead of just the username and the password. So from a protecting the account perspective from a bad actor, it doesn't really do anything. It does protect the account a little bit more from an outside attack, but there are more threat vectors than just outside attacks. So like IT Glue does do some very good documentation stuff. It does some good sharing of passwords, but anything that, controversially, I'll say that anything that helps you share passwords between users encourages MSPs to use shared administrator accounts, which is encouraging bad behavior and bad practice. You know?
I agree. I think you're right. And, let's even threat model something against this for a minute. Let's say, Martin, that I'm a bad guy, and I'm definitely targeting you as an MSP admin because of your level of access. So what happens if I get session access, maybe through a phishing email that you click on? And let's all be honest. I mean, I'm susceptible to phishing emails. Connor from Finn actually phished me one day just as a joke, and he got me to click. It was good. He's like, I just wanted to see if I could get you. And he knows me well enough. He did enough intel on me. He got me on something. I'll admit it. So we're all susceptible to it. So let's say you click on a phishing email and it delivers something that gives them actual access to the machine itself, right? Those kinds of things. That's a great example of a threat vector where now the bad guy is operating on your machine under your session. It's possible for them to directly get into something like that and get access to all those shared credentials. That can happen, right?
Yeah, it totally can. And once they're in with that, if you're just storing a username and password and OTP in IT Glue or some other password vault, a threat actor gets access to those. Because it's a shared administrator credential, you don't have any traceability to where that, and say they do use it to access one of your clients and you see the attack on your client. You don't have any traceability back to where that attack came from because it's a shared administrator account. 15 people have access to it. 15 people use it on a regular basis. You can go look at IT Glue and see who last looked at it, but then you're just guessing. And
fair point.
That really becomes problematic.
Yeah. Okay. So this is an example of, like, as great as a platform might be for certain things, we might misuse it in other ways that we hadn't really thought through the ramifications of that. But we better be sure a threat actor who has access to an account is going to certainly go after something like that. I mean, so you're right. This is a great example of us really taking a step back and the need and security to think through the lens of a bad guy. What could they do and how could they do it? And we might realize we're using a tool in the wrong way. I'm trying to think of like a hardware analogy here. Maybe I have a compound miter saw, and maybe it's really good for cutting angles for certain things, but I also want to use it to, like, I don't know, maybe do some woodwork for my floor or something like that. Could I use the compound miter saw for that? Maybe, but it's a terrible, terrible tool for a use like that. So this is a good lesson learned in account management and just how important this stuff is. And again, this is why I think insurance is picking up on these things because they're seeing this as a result or leading to a significant breach.
Yeah, and privileged account breaches. I think last year accounted for 78% of all data loss was because people
really
privileged credentials. Yeah, it's
did not know that.
There are lots of zero-day attacks that you have to protect against. There are lots of like actual bugs in software that you have to protect against, but privileged credential abuse is by and far the largest single reason for data breaches in the last couple of years. It is just deplorable how much data gets stolen.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible. So I see a question that came in from Matt, a really, really good one. I'm going to answer this one as best I can. So let me read this. He's saying, so are you seeing that cyber insurance will start requiring MSPs to use a PAM, a privileged account management? If so, when do you expect this to be pushed out? So that's a great question, Matt. And I'm actually pulling up, I can't show this to you, but I can read it to you. So I'm looking at an insurance questionnaire from Beasley, and many of us know and use Beasley, right? And so I want to talk about this for a minute. There's a couple ones that are on here that I just want to read, and then I'm going to get your thoughts on this, Martin. So here's one question: how many service accounts with domain administrator privileges are in your IT environment? Service accounts are non-human privileged accounts used to execute applications, access local and network resources, and run automated services, virtual machine instances, and other processes. Does that shock you as a question that insurance wants to know about?
No, it does not at all, because I spent 12 years working at an MSP, and I saw all types of places and things set up with service accounts that were still allowed to log on. So if you have a service account, just because it's not supposed to log on, unless you've actually turned off the interactive logon for it and you've limited it to only log on at certain places and have access to certain things, that's a real security hole. And because an MSP is not in charge of the application that's using the service account, most MSP technicians get really scared when it comes to changing the password on a service account. because they don't know what they're going to break. And especially in a larger, more complex environment, you change your password in a service account, all of a sudden the line of business app doesn't work. And then the MSP is just in there having to either set that password back to what it was, which they might not have remembered, or just debug all these crazy broken things for all the places this password might have been embedded. So because of that, most service accounts never get password changed. It will be years, and people will just exclude it from the password change policy because it's a service account. Nobody uses it, but yet it gets known. It's in hash files. It's on a machine you can dump, and you can figure out what the password is for it. So it becomes really, really a big hole. And
it does indeed.
And a lot of those service accounts are actually just in plain text and config files. Like web.config holds usernames and passwords in plain text, and it's problematic. It's also an issue that's near and dear to my heart, because many years ago when I was working at MSP, I saw this issue and I was like, hey, we shouldn't be using service accounts at all. If you had a domain, you can actually grant access to a machine to access to other resources. So you don't have to have a service account. You can run something to authenticate as a machine and then grant it rights to other machines, to network resources, things like that. So it's only older line of business apps that you can't do that with, older applications. So there's lots of ways around it. And the conscientious MSPs are trying to get rid of service accounts.
So I'm going to get back to the questionnaire, but you're really getting me thinking on this. If you're an MSP or not an MSP and you're watching this today and you want to learn more about what Martin's talking about, go look at CIS Control 5. Control 5 is all about what you're talking about, Martin, and they actually talk about service accounts in that. It's all on account management. So there's a pathway to do this right, and I totally agree. Like, this is baseline security in my mind. It's too risky for you to have these stale, never changed, God level access in these service accounts. So go take a look at CIS Control 5 and look at what they talk about on the things to set through, because what you said there is right as rain. Okay, can I get back? Let me get back to a couple others I want your thoughts on. So the next question they ask around service accounts for Beasley is they ask, do you configure service accounts using the principle of least privilege? In other words, have you removed domain admin privileges from these service accounts that don't require such privileges to function? So what we're talking about there is sort of like attack surface, right, Martin, of like even going through and applying some thought process ahead of time to say, can I cull down what all this account allows? And this even applies to APIs as well. APIs that have God level access, and we can cull some of that down if it exists. This is an important piece to security, is doing least privilege. Don't you think, Martin?
Oh, yes. There's a huge piece of least privilege that is overlooked, especially from, I worked in MSP. I understand how busy they are, how you've got 10 tickets, 50 tickets in your queue that you've got to get to in the next hour, or somebody's going to come yell at you, or somebody's going to call back. So a lot of times, if something's not working for an application that uses a service account, MSP technicians just add privilege, add privilege, add privilege. Oh, all of a sudden it's working. Move on with life. Next ticket, this person needs this computer and mouse installed. And that's what so unless you go back and you look and you figure out which of those privileges it really needs, and it's also a software development problem, because a lot of line of business apps are not written with a least privilege mentality. They're written to just need God level access to do basic things. Like there was an archiving, data, what's it called? A word processing data archiving thing that I worked with a while ago. You literally gave it a PDF, and it stored this on several different drives in archive capable ways, so that in 50 years, you're sure you can still get this piece of information back. It required domain admin level access just to store a PDF on a series of different machines. And it's enterprise level software that was just not written with that least privilege access thing to it.
And it's crazy, Martin, how common that is in terms of, they're not thinking about this. These line of business apps and companies that make them are not thinking through this from the lens of a bad guy. And a bad guy's like, are you kidding? This is a treasure trove of information for me, and all I need is that service account to get in. Hello, I'm going after that for sure. So you're right as rain. That's another big takeaway if you're watching this today, is put some time and energy into least privilege. And you know what's kind of amazing to me on that one, Martin, is this, Beasley is asking about it. They're not making you define it. They're not making you prove it. That's not a criteria decision, that like, that's not going to make or break you, but you're definitely seeing them point to, let's say, let me just do a little fear factor, if I could, for a minute. Like, you could potentially see one day a carrier saying, wait a second, in the aftermath, you said in the questionnaire that you're applying principle of least privilege. We see that nowhere. We see no evidence that you've culled away any of those permissions. Could that ever be, a lawsuit where they come after the insured and pull back the funds? Maybe. I think it's logical to assume that could happen one day. So that's why a question like that exists in the questionnaire. Is they're not, it's, principle of least privilege is sort of like a finger in the wind a little bit of like really working through what you need. You use your best opinions on it. But that's why they're asking, because I don't think a lot of us have really ever truly gone through principle of least privilege exercises. Don't you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. I see MSPs that for access to their clients, they'll set up an SSO server that gives their one internet facing account full privilege in all of their clients. That is just the same, a treasure trove of a target for a hacker. Because if you have one internet facing account, no matter how it's protected, if it's SMS, if it's MFA, whatever, they have one internet facing account that you can get access to and then have full administrative control over every single MSP client that you have that this technician has access to. That is definitely not least privileged. That single account is sitting there with way more privilege than it should have. And I have seen that many times. That's actually one of the biggest things I think people use to do privileged account management is they use SSO, especially cloud facing for an MSP technician is just unbearably risky, in my opinion.
Yep, totally agree. That's well said. Okay, so a couple others I think are interesting that are on here. Next question they ask around this is, do you have specific monitoring rules in place for service accounts to alert your security operations center of any abnormal behavior? Now, isn't that interesting? This gets back to that point you made earlier of if you're using shared admin accounts, it becomes much more difficult for me to even be alarmed that there's misuse happening. Maybe if like I can see that admin account was accessed from Uzbekistan, maybe, but many cases line of business apps don't support like tying in an IP address or location with the access to that account. So this comes back again to what you've been talking about from the beginning of like, I'm not even sure many cases we can detect anomalous usage of service accounts if we're not using them in the correct way, or we are only using service accounts with generic names that are not tied to the individual users. Don't you think?
Right. And I've even seen people I've seen MSPs that use that shared administrator account that technicians use as a service account. So the same account that technicians use to log in is the account that the QuickBooks server is running at, or something like that. So from analyzing that pattern of access for that account, there's no pattern. It's all over the place. 17 different people are using it. 18 different applications that run based on service accounts are using it. Any sort of patterning based on a SOC or SIM is just out the window.
Okay. Yep. You nailed it. Okay. So a few other questions. I'm going to just jet past these pretty quickly, but there's one last one that'll come back to Matt's question. Have you configured service accounts to deny interactive logins? So that's an interesting one. They're really wanting to make sure, hey, we don't want to have, I think that word interactive logins, that kind of goes back to that Windows world, doesn't it? Of like, actual keyboard logins. Is that what they're talking about there?
By interactive login, they mean logging into a machine in any way, whether it's physically on the machine via RDP, Screen Connect, something like that. Anywhere you get a login prompt and you log in, that's what they're talking about. They want to make sure that those service accounts cannot be used to log in the machine, any machine. They can only be used to run whatever application is supposed to run. It's a pretty basic security thing that they should be doing with every service account.
Okay. So that doesn't shock you that Beasley's asking for that question to make sure that you don't. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
They should.
That's good.
That should be done.
Okay. And then this is one I think is good. Do you require service account passwords to be over 25 characters or randomly generated? It's interesting to me because for the longest time, you've always seen good security is 8 characters or more. And we all know when it comes to brute forcing, you can instantly brute force something that's 12 characters or less in this world, right? Or you have rainbow tables that already have them computed. So it's good to see them increase the password strength complexity requirements. I mean, we know that's not a, what is the word, panacea to fix all these problems. But it's good to see that in place of them finally going up to like 25 is pretty obscenely long, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. It protects against brute force attacks. It protects against dumping a password hash file and like figuring out from there. That is a long password like that totally shuts off 2 of those vectors, and that's great. But there are other vectors that people use for long passwords, that like stealing them, taking them from IT glue, taking them from a password vault, like, seeing them written in a configuration file. If they're in plain text in a configuration file, doesn't matter if they're 25 or 64 characters.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay. So the next one that's here is, and I think this is a good one too. Do you rotate passwords for service accounts on a regular basis? So again, going back to hygiene, are you actually rotating these things? What do they always say? Passwords like underwear, right? Like you shouldn't hang them on your monitor. You should change often, all this kind of stuff, right? So they're definitely going that direction of saying, hey, we want to make sure that you have rotation of those service accounts if you have them in place, because, if you're not rotating those passwords, I know they're going to go stale. That's probably a guarantee, right?
Yep. And it's at that point where you rotate the password, the reason to rotate the password is to break somebody's longstanding access. So if a hacker has access and you rotate the password every 90 days, on average, they're only going to have access for 45 days when they get the password. So like rotating the password is very good. The more often that you rotate it, the shorter that average duration that hacker keeps access. And by making sure that they're rotating access or rotating those passwords to break access also is an indicative of a good understanding of your client's environments. That means that you're not a technician, you're not scared to go change a password because you don't know where it's used. You know that password for that service account is used in this one place. You change it here, it affects everything. Everything's going to keep working. It's not embedded in places you know about. So it goes beyond the security. It is like finger in the wind or an indicator that this MSP really does have a good grasp on the software and the things that their clients are doing and running.
And I have to think that's a real deal issue, right? Like you look at the Colonial Pipeline attack of last year where people end up filling up gas in like a tarp covered in the back of their pickup truck because they can't get gas, right? And all of that happened because bad guys got access to Colonial Pipeline through compromised credentials through a VPN that should have been decommissioned. And yeah, there's a lot of other things that led to the breach too, for sure, inside of that, like actually getting rid of decommissioned stuff. But that goes to your point. If there had been rotating of passwords, I would think that should not have ever happened, right? Even that is a minimum, let alone all the other things that they were mistakes made, right?
Right. Yeah. And rotating the passwords is just an indicator that they know what's going on in the environment. If you are willing to rotate a password, even on a more frequent basis, it shows you are willing to make changes because you understand the effect of your changes. If you are not willing to decommission something, if you're not willing to change a password, that most of the time comes from a fear of the unknown of the consequences of your actions. So like this is a really good indicator. That's a really good indicating question on the level of confidence and understanding that an MSP has for their clients' networks. I love that
Completely agree. Completely agree with that. Yep. So again, another huge takeaway of just how important rotation of these passwords actually is. It's not something we do just because security people say do it. It's a critical control for sure. Okay. So the last question that exists on Beasley's application is, do you manage passwords for service accounts with a PAM solution or password vault? So there it is. It's actually in an application. They're like literally spelled out, PAM. So to answer your question, Matt, long-winded, we finally got to it. That's not a pass-fail yet, but it's going to be. You're going to eventually see what happens for insurance is in the aftermath of paying out a breach, that they get with their forensics teams that did all the work and say, we want to know how this happened. Tell us what controls were not in place. Tell us the source of this. Tell me how it happened. And then they use that data to say, okay, we now have this question we've been asking for data gathering is now a criteria making decision. So I see, Matt, you're asking, is it 3 years, 5 years? It's impossible for me to say. I'd say, but I would lean towards 3 years versus 5, because this is too important in the attack life cycle for it to be ignored. Don't you think the same thing? I mean, of course you do, because this is what you guys do, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I really think it's just that important, Mark.
I think both from an insurance payout perspective and just your clients not getting compromised perspective, the privileged account management needs to be higher on people's priority lists than it is right now. Like, because you've been sharing an admin account for 30 years of your existence as an MSP, or 5 years, that doesn't mean that's okay. And you need to, MSPs really need to step up that game when it comes to privileged account management. And insurance companies are definitely driving this. Their requirements right now for MFA are driving people toward better privileged account management. I personally think that the insurance companies, when they ask about MFA, they're asking the tip of the iceberg question. Do you have MFA? Well, the point in their mind, the point of MFA is to prove that the person using the account is the person they say they are. So underlying this, are you using MFA, is really, are you using MFA? Are your accounts tied to a specific person? Do you do proper account management? Do you create accounts for individuals, remove those accounts, remove their access when they leave? Do you do proper, account rights setting and least privilege access for all of these accounts? I think that the MFA question that people are blowing by on insurance requirements is the tip of the iceberg. And similar to that travelers lawsuit that's going on, I think that people are going to really be tripped up when the whole iceberg emerges from the water and they only did the little tip of it and they see all this stuff underneath it. Oh, I really needed to do all that? Yeah.
To your point on that, one thing that's interesting about travelers in particular is they have a 2-page supplemental kind of add-on to the policy. And right now, travelers is one of the only ones that's doing this, but I think we'll see others follow suit that's specifically around what you just said, around MFA and making sure they go the extra mile of explaining it's not just MFA on and that's it, but the configuration of that, who it exists for, how it exists, how it works. I agree. I mean, that's the direction we're going. And I'll put my prognosticator's hat on for a minute, Martin, and I'm going to say, I actually think, this is just pure guess, I have no inside knowledge of this, I think that Travelers is going to lose this lawsuit, because right now that 2-page supplemental is pretty vague. And traditionally, courts are not going to side with the insurance on this because of the vagueness. But what I think is going to happen is, even if Travelers loses the lawsuit, you're going to see them come back and say, okay, fine, but we are going to make this razor clear on exactly how MFA must be rolled out and how privileged access must be rolled out, so that the next time this happens, we do go after an insured for misrepresenting, that is not going to happen, and we are going to win a suit like that. So I think either way, because I know it's the buzz, everyone's talking about this. This is the first time that insurance companies come after a client for misrepresenting. That's their claim. But I think regardless, even if they lose, we're going to see new clarification come into exactly what you just talked about, Martin.
Yeah, I think clarification is coming either way. I've actually talked to other experts that say they think Travelers is going to win this lawsuit. They think that enough security experts are going to come up and say, all right, this MFA question was really related to these cybersecurity standards. And they're going to pull up the cybersecurity standards, SOC, CMMC, all those, and say, hey, here are the lines where it talks about these things that a good cybersecurity compliant person should be doing. They all mean the same thing. They all say unique accounts, MFA tied to the account. And so I think, I'm kind of on the fence. I'm interested to see where it goes, but I totally agree with you that after the lawsuit, it's going to be made razor clear that you have to do these correct, proper things. And it's going to go from a 2-page to an 80-page add-on.
Yep. I mean, you're right. There's no other way for it to happen, for sure. And I actually welcome that to a large degree, because at least we finally have some teeth coming into all this to force those changes. And, it's tough for MSPs that, have to juggle 60 clients. It's tough for MSPs who are also dealing with those clients who don't always want and buy into new security controls to change their way of life, even though it's not really that big of a change. And so, hey, I welcome our new overlords if that's what it takes to get better security and reduce payouts to Russian ransomware actors who are driving around their local towns in their moon Lambos because they've made all their money ripping off small business. Like, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. A few questions coming into chat that I thought would be good for us to answer. And I'm really curious, Martin, what your thoughts are on this one is, do you think, and I'll take the first swing at it, but do you think cyber insurance, why do you think insurance does not map their questions back to a security standard like CIS? Part of the reason for that, and Matt, I hate to shock you, but insurance are not actually that smart and they don't really know security that well. Not yet. They're getting there. So I think you're going to see that happen. And I'm even going to make a prediction that you'll eventually see a certification pathway of sorts that have an auditability to them. And if you have that pathway in certain ways, you're going to get pretty significant discounts in your insurance because you have these things in place that can actually be attested to. That's like the long-term direction of where some of this is going. But yeah, it's kind of shocking right now that you don't see insurance questionnaires become framework aligned. Right now, it's still knee-jerk. It's still where they see breaches happen, that's where they ask the questions. But eventually, I think you'll see some framework aligned approaches towards insurance. What do you think, Martin?
I think you're mostly right. I think there's so many security frameworks out there. There's HIPAA, there's PCI, NIST, CMMC, SOC 2, CIC. There are a ton of different frameworks. And I think that the insurance companies might just be waiting for one to percolate up to the top. I've heard from other people that there's legislation coming to say, if you work on somebody else's network, you have to meet this cybersecurity framework. I think insurance companies don't want to be the one that picks that framework. I don't think they want to let legislators pick that framework, and then they'll just pile on top of it. And which framework's going to win? Who knows?
Yep. It's well said. And I think there's a lot of precedent of like things brewing in the winds on that. An example is I remember the CISA director, Jen Easterly, made a comment last year where someone asked her, I think it was Jen Easterly, they asked her, what do you think about security frameworks and why are they not required? And she made a comment along the lines of, yeah, I'm not so sure that optional security requirements make sense anymore. Hinting at, at some point, is the federal government going to force a certain standard? And who knows how and when and if, but that's certainly a direction that's going to at some point be entertained. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, MSPs are one of the last places where it's really the Wild West and you don't need a certification to do anything. I heard a guy say a while ago, barbers require more licensing than MSPs do. And the level of data breach possible from a barber is near zero.
Yeah.
So it's an area that's going to get regulated. It's just coming.
Yeah, I agree. And we even seen pieces of this in the new omnibus that was pushed through last year that included the Cyber Incident Reporting Act. MSPs are even mentioned in that. So now the term managed service provider is an accepted, understood term in federal legislature. It's not forcing major changes now. It's just forcing incident reporting, especially where the government's involved. But yeah, I mean, it's like Indiana Jones, right? Once that big that boulder starts rolling, you ain't stopping. You're just going to have to run against it and figure it out, right? You're not going to stop it. So yeah, I definitely agree. So yeah, there's your answer to that question, Matt. It's a good one. Another one, as an MSP, does it make sense to have a templated response to these questions back to a security standard? I think the questionnaire is the questionnaire. But I think this is all the more reason why you approach security from a framework aligned approach, because you don't have to guess. And as long as you're framework aligned, it's going to map into the things that questionnaires are asking about for sure. You're never going to get tripped up on something a questionnaire is going to ask about if you're framework aligned.
As long as you are not just looking at the framework as a series of checkboxes to check off, as long as you're looking at the framework as really a way to become more security aware and you really adopt it. Because I've talked to people who just look at security frameworks as checkboxes. Do I do this in some way? Yes. Do I do this in some way? Yes. All right, now I'm compliant. Moving on with my day, back to doing exactly what I was doing before with some checkboxes overlaid on top of it. So yeah, the security frameworks are great. They have really good information in them. Find an expert, get your company certified, in some framework. And then there are even companies that will do framework to framework mapping for you. So that if you can meet this framework, they'll tell you, well, you need to do these things down here to meet these other 6 frameworks or whatever frameworks you want to go toward. So there's a lot out there about frameworks.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, I mean, so any other thoughts around all of this that strike your mind that we haven't talked about yet?
Privileged account management is important, and it is an area that has been ignored in the history of MSPs. MSPs specifically, need to really step up the game. Insurance is pushing it. Cybersecurity frameworks are pushing it. I think that clients are going to start pushing it soon, but it's hard to know when.
Yeah. Okay. Only other thing I can think of, and I did see a question come in on this, like, what about MFA being forced on privileged accounts, like switches, even if they don't have business data associated with them? Or another thing to think about is like, line of business applications that don't support MFA. Those kinds of things do exist. And man, there are even some platforms I've seen that don't even allow you to change passwords of like service accounts. I mean, that still exists today. Yeah, unfortunately, those things exist. I think what's important to do is to make sure you document those systems. Make sure that you document that in your insurance questionnaire so that you've disclosed that. Insurance understands those things, but I think what's important is understanding, well, how do I build controls around those things? So even if the switch doesn't contain critical data, it may be responsible for passing that critical data, transmitting it. So it's important just to make sure that you are putting appropriate controls where you can. Around certain things, right? Like healthcare is a great example of this. You have an ancient CAT scanner that's running on, I don't know, Windows NT or something, and the doctor wants it. The doctor's not getting rid of it. So, okay, you got to put controls around all of that, air gap it, whatever it might be. So certainly, you have to think through those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think those are all great points. And I think that with the MFA on all accounts, I think that insurance companies are going to require that. And if your hardware or software doesn't meet those requirements, they have to change if you want cyber insurance. I think it's going to come to that real soon.
Yeah. Definitely a big 1-2 combination for sure on all of that, because I think you're right. I think we've underestimated just how important all of this is pre-breach, and what leads to a breach is just how important privileged access management is for all of this. So yeah, hopefully it's a big takeaway. Any other takeaways that you can think of that we haven't talked about, Martin? We talked about rotating service accounts, privilege of least privilege. We've talked about good hygiene. We've talked about MFA. Anything else around privileged access management or account management that we've not talked about?
That just people need to do it. It's insurance companies are requiring it. It just needs to get done.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Tell us about, before we wrap up, you want to tell us about anything, Wes? Anything that you want to plug or talk about?
Yeah, for sure. Why don't we both do kind of what we both do? I think that's helpful. So Fifth Wall is as far as I'm aware, we're the largest exclusive cyber broker. So all we do is cyber. We don't do fire, casualty, life, any of that other stuff. We don't touch. All we do is cyber. We've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years, way before cyber policies were like the hot thing. So we've been doing this for a really, really long time. And we have access to 35 plus carriers, so deeper than anyone that's out there. And what's great about that is we've been pulled into these MSP discussions so often. Because what's happened for us at Fifth Wall is a client is now going through these very complicated questionnaires. What used to be, do you have a name, a business name, and can you fog a mirror? You get insurance. Right now, these big, long, multi-page questionnaires. And so what happens for SMBs are they're like, I don't know any of this stuff. What are you talking about? My IT guys do this. So then the MSP gets into the conversation, and it's a real challenge because the MSP sometimes gets pulled into this, and they're like, you've never asked us this before. And oh my goodness, I've been trying to get you to do MFA, and you've been resisting MFA, and your own questionnaire says that you have it rolled out everywhere. You're putting us in a rock and a hard place here as an MSP. And that's both really bad and good in the sense of now MSPs have this conduit by which they can sort of say the big bad insurance people are forcing these standards that you didn't want to do. And now the client's like, well, this is too big of a risk for us to not handle. And so this is what Fifth Wall does. We engage with you as an MSP in your cyber insurance journey. So we can go through and we can help you find the right policy for your clients, in many cases immensely cheaper than what they're currently paying, because we have access to way more than others have. But also, we help MSPs by helping them identify, hey, these are like the 5 big things that need to be in place. Things like privileged account management, things like phishing awareness, things like managed EDR, things like MFA everywhere. These are the big controls that need to be in place. And so really helping MSPs say, hey, we're going to have better control alignment, because now the bad insurance guys are forcing it, and helping the clients get the right protections that they need. So that's what 𝘂𝗏𝗏 does.
Cool. Thanks. I'm Martin White from Ruffian Software. We wrote a privileged account management product specifically targeted at MSPs. We don't do anything but MSPs. An MSP has 10 technicians, and they service 100 domains. That's really 1,000 accounts that they should make. They should make 10 accounts at every client, 1 for each technician. They have to rotate passwords on that. They have to set rights. They have to create those accounts, and they have to disable those accounts when technician leaves. Doing that piece for both cyber insurance requirements, for MFA requirements, just for basic security hygiene, it becomes untenable. Every time you add a technician, you have to make all these accounts. Every technician has to go rotate all these passwords. That problem is the problem we solve. We automate every bit of that, and we make it just for MSPs. So ruffiansoftware.com, our product is TechIDManager. Come check us out. Wes Spencer from Fifth Wall. Go check them out if you're looking for cyber insurance and you're an MSP. All right. Thanks for coming, y'all.
Super fun. Martin,
All right.
Thank you.
We'll do it again. Thank you, Wes. Bye.
Bye.